The Empire has struck back, but all is not lost, as a ragtag group of rebels take stock, regroup, and try once more to restore freedom to the galaxy. Released in cinemas 3 years after The Empire Strikes Back, but set only a year afterwards, Return of the Jedi is a spectacle of special effects led cinema, and while it may not reach the dramatic highs of Empire, it's nonetheless a worthwhile way to complete a trilogy. After all, it made more than enough of us want more Star Wars for a decade and a half afterwards. Naturally, in 1994, a year after the release of Super Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, the final movie in the original trilogy would find its way to Super Nintendo, and other consoles, but that's a story for another time, hint hint. Sculptured Software would once again take development duties, and for what it's worth, it feels like lessons have definitely been learnt after the flaws of the prior titles. They really got into their stride here, making for the best looking and sounding game of the series. The levels are incredibly detailed with some clever visual touches, the sprites are bold and there's more character to them, meanwhile the cutscenes are more dynamic and use more digitised images from the film itself to keep the presentation in line with the movie. It starts immediately with a Mode 7 land speeder section straight away as you race to Jabba's palace to rescue Han. You'll need to be on your toes here to leap over chasms and avoid smashing into rock formations. Luckily there are plenty of health pickups and a few force icons for points. Once you pass this brief introduction level, you can get into the game proper, and this time around Luke, Leia and Chewbacca are selectable from the very start of the game, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. Luke Skywalker is now an accomplished Force user, but now has only 5 Force powers in this game instead of the 8 he had back in Super Empire Strikes Back, but luckily he's kept most of the better ones. There's Force Saber, which lets you throw your weapon around the screen, Deflect, which automatically deflects enemy lasers, Freeze, which encases an entire screen of enemies in ice, Vanish, that makes you transparent and pretty much invincible for a brief time, and Heal, which allows you to restore your health. Each of these powers deplete your Force bar when used, but it feels like there are more Force replenishing power-ups this time around. Chewbacca remains completely unchanged in terms of abilities, but thankfully he still keeps that insanely powerful spin move that makes him invincible, deals heaps of damage and quickly recharges. Finally, Princess Leia makes her playable debut from the very start. In the early stages, she is disguised as the bounty hunter Boushh, but she also has a few costume changes throughout the game which we'll get onto later. In this guise, she uses a short range staff to attack, but can unleash a long range energy beam by holding the attack button for a short while and then releasing it. She also has her own version of Luke's saber jump too, which is just as effective. Finally, she's able to block using her staff. As our trio climb to Jabba's palace, you can instantly see the visual upgrade given to this third instalment. Levels are much more detailed and interesting to look at. See the heat hazing in the background, with there being also a lot more variety to each stage as well. No longer is there hours spent through going identikit areas repeated over and over again. Jedi is also a much friendlier game than Empire overall, with checkpoints generous and now visible as they come in the form of R2-D2. There's a good balance to difficulty now, which was sadly missing from Empire. As we reach the entrance to Jabba's abode, the first boss of the game is a weird spy hole droid at the door. It bounces around to try and crush you while expelling lightning, but ranged weaponry is definitely a good way to dispatch of this sentient ring doorbell. Inside Jabba's palace is an awesome looking stage with so much to look at. I love the detail in the onlookers in the foreground and the background. Jawas return to be slaughtered once more, while a varied range of alien creatures stands between you and the big guy. There are some acrobatic Twi'lek dancing girls, rock wielding brutes, and a few weird frogs with teeth, plus a few flame throwing nasties. Oh, and Salacious Crumb is also knocking about, cackling away at you until you bonk him on the head. Of course, you'll need to be very careful of multiple trapdoors, not least because falling in them leads to instant death, but some of them also expel small rancors that attack you as well. But once you reach Jabba's throne, old Fatso will be getting a front row seat to you beating the absolute bejesus out of his servant Bib Fortuna, this level's boss. Finish him off and you'll play as either Luke or Chewie as they make their own way through Jabba's palace to bargain for Han's life, and rescue Leia while they're at it. This dark area is quite labyrinthian in structure, but at least you have a few of Jabba's goons to keep you company. The levels in this game are definitely a little less straightforward than previous entries in the Super Star Wars series, but thankfully there isn't too much of a risk of getting lost, for the most part anyway. There are a few dicey falling platforms over bottomless pits, but Sculpture Software finally learnt not to chuck oodles of enemies around them, so there's something to be grateful for. The end of this area features a gigantic version of the smaller frog seen throughout the level. It's a huge Mode 7 powered behemoth, but very susceptible to the old lightsaber super jump move, so you can kill him in less than 15 seconds if you're particularly quick. We've rescued Han, so now we have a trio to choose from, including Luke and Chewie too. This is good because they've been thrown into the Rancor pit. Another dark and cavernous stage, the two main barriers are the destructible floors you need to blast apart, and these heinously irritating volcano thingies that spit out projectiles for a long time that you can't even pass without hurting yourself until they stop. Like Chewbacca, the returning Han Solo retains the exact same abilities, including his uber powerful grenades, and as it happens, this stage is more than happy to hand them to you on a platter, along with plenty of blaster upgrades. For the third game in a row, you start with a laser and can upgrade to flame rounds, seeker missiles, rapid iron, and finally a plasma shot. An absolutely humongous and fire-breathing Mode 7 powered Rancor is unsurprisingly your boss for this level, and is as impressive to look at as it is large. However, all of that size means diddly squat when you have about 30 grenades and a blaster to let loose with. Jabba's Sail Barge is our next destination, and it's another great looking level as you leap from barge to barge. Playing as Luke, there's a lot of forced canister power ups about, so it's a good opportunity to use some of those powers to get by. I found Freeze to be incredibly useful, especially as this is the sort of stage featuring a lot of long range turrets that require a lot of moving platform jumps. Plus it kind of feels right to play as Luke on this level. Once you've made your way past an army of bounty hunters, it's time to fight this ball and chain wielding beast. His attacks are pretty well telegraphed, so he's not that terrible to deal with. Luke takes a leave of absence for the next level, so Han Solo, Chewie and a bikini-clad Leia hunt for Jabba inside his sail barge. In her skimpier outfit, Leia now wields a whip and has a similar charge move to her boost disguise, but the staff block has been replaced with a twirling move, while her super jump is a similar twirl attack but in the air. There are a ton of environmental hazards to be wary of here, from pistons in the background, rolling barrels, steam from broken pipes, and a few really unfair bottomless pit traps that enemies just love to push you into. No new enemies of note here apart from the usual crowd that hangs around Jabba, but you'll be pleased to know that you'll finally be fighting the Hutt himself. He is too lazy to actually move, instead he sits on a moving platform and spits his froggy snacks at you. If you haven't learnt yet, Han Solo's grenades are ridiculously useful for bosses, so have at it. After what seems like an age, we finally leave Jabba's palace and Tatooine for good. Luke and Leia now set off for Endor, the land of the grumpy teddy bears. In another vehicular minigame, once again you need to kill X number of enemies. In this case you're riding on a speeder bike and taking down Imperial scouts. You gotta admit, it feels like it's been a while since we actually fought some Imperial enemies. Dodge trees, jump over logs and blow these suckers out of the sky so you can move on to the next stage. If you've ever dreamed of playing as Warwick Davis, you can either play Willow on the NES or in the arcade, or this game, because you're now tearing shit up as Wicket the Ewok. In this treetop village, you'll be armed with a simple bow and arrow, taking on Imperial troops twice your height. Expect to be doing a lot of climbing and jumping between trees. What I particularly like about playing as Wicket is that his arrows stick into walls that can be used to bounce to higher levels, a mechanic that is incredibly useful, nay essential for these next two levels. At the end of the first village level, you're up against this odd droid on a jet bike. I'm not sure what its deal is, but there's a serious mismatch in firepower here. Even though he has a rapid fire cannon and drops bombs, he's incredibly weak and easily destroyed, taking you to the second and final Ewok village level. The second level starts off with a good old water slide, and then it's time for some more climbing and more sliding. Some of the Endor wildlife gets in the way, but they're not too much of a handful. The biggest hazard here is some really nasty flaws in the level design, such as this arrow that makes you think like, this is a good place to jump down, and then you fall into the water and die. So you try and work your way down slowly, only to fall into a water slide that dumps you into the same instant kill water. Once you figure all of that out via patience and great care, your boss is this weird green rhino that breathes fire. I'm not sure where Sculpted Software got all the ideas for these enemies from, but I guess they couldn't just all be Imperial Stormtroopers. He is no match for your rudimentary weaponry though. Now it's time for Luke to step up to the plate once more, and he's on his way to settle a score with his old man Papa Vader. This might be my least favourite level, to be honest. It's a massive wide open space and it's not terribly clear where you actually need to go. Eventually you realise that you need to make your way all the way to the upper areas, but even then you think you need to go all the way to the right, and then you reach the end of the screen in R2-D2 and what appears to be the end of the level, but no, you then have to find your way back up to the top and figure out where the actual boss is. It is a pretty impressive boss though, a gigantic transport carrier and a few of the massive assault droids from Empire Strikes Back, but they all fall to their knees at the power of your Saber super jump. Time for another Mode 7-a-thon, and this one is pretty cool. You are controlling the top turret of the Falcon and have to scroll left and right, blowing up oncoming TIE fighters. It's pretty brief and doesn't overstay its welcome, so it's a nice palate cleanser in time for the upcoming stage. Han, Chewie and Leia are up and ready to raise hell on the power generator, and it's another costume change for Leia. In her Endor Rebel costume, she is just a standard blaster wielding character. She doesn't even have any special moves, grenades or anything, so she's pretty useless when compared to Han and Chewie at this point. There isn't too much to say about this level, to be honest. There's a lot of Imperial Stormtroopers and officers to kill, there are turrets and mortars to blow up and platforms to jump between. There's an area filled with destructible walls that take ages to blow up, but it's filled with blaster power-ups and extra lives, so it's well worth taking the time to dig in and grab everything. I haven't yet mentioned the single new power-up in Return of the Jedi. This pickup gives you super speed and is the absolute worst thing ever. It usually appears when there's a part of the game that requires accurate platforming, and with it you move so fast you become an uncontrollable mess. Kids, say no to speed pickups. Eventually you reach these circular moving platforms with turrets in the centre, and the first one has one of those arrows that makes you think you should jump straight down. Don't. After that first lesson, it's just a matter of jumping between the moving platforms and quickly blowing up the turrets before they hit you. Then as you reach the end of the level, there's a massive Death Star like laser that intermittently fires, so you need to make sure you're not in its path when it goes off. At the end is the source of this gigantic laser, and this time you'll need to climb up falling platforms while dodging the fast moving beam, and also while trying to hit it. The easiest thing to do is just lob grenades at it over and over again and just keep your eye on your footing. Now the shield generator is down, Luke can enter the Death Star and face his destiny, his father and Emperor Palpatine. But before that happens, it's back to the old Super Star Wars staple of droids, stormtroopers and moving platformers. Two gigantic assault droids await you at the end, but they seem so much easier to kill than it did back in Empire. They're not even proper bosses, but defeating them finishes the level for some reason. It's time to pilot the Falcon once more, and it's another kill n number of TIE Fighters battle. It plays very similarly to the Death Star level in the first Super Star Wars, and well, most of the vehicle sections in these games really. You'd think they'd come up with something a little more unique for this last game, but no. Back to action platforming, and Luke comes face to face with his true nemesis, the Sith speed up icon of doom. Oh god, I can't control a thing! A lot of the lightsaber super jumps, Imperial officers, stormtroopers, droids and moving platforms later, and you're at the end of the level with another 2 assault droids to blow up, followed by a lone Imperial guard enemy. If that seemed anticlimactic, well, it is. Never mind, the next level is a bit more interesting. A brief section featuring Red Imperial guards is quickly followed by a final battle with Darth Vader himself. He is far less harmful than he was back in Super Empire Strikes Back, with just fewer attacks and no force powers whatsoever. Another enemy falls prey to the lightsaber super jump. And now for the final platforming level and the final proper boss. A showdown in the Emperor's chamber with old Emperor Palpatine himself. They sampled his creepy old man laugh and it sounds pretty damn good. He's also really terrifying looking, especially as he floats around the screen, throwing force lightning all around the place. However, you always have the power to heal yourself, and there are plenty of destructible items that drop force replenishing items, so he shouldn't trouble you. You'd think that defeating the final boss would be the end of Super Return of the Jedi, but if you did, then you've forgotten the plot of the film, haven't you? Or at the very least, you didn't read the game's manual, because it tells you that there are 2 final levels right here. Remember when manuals spoiled the game for you? Anyway, it is time to strap into the Millennium Falcon for the real finale, a tense ride through the bowels of the second Death Star over the course of 2 levels. First up, we are travelling through to the core, avoiding pipes and taking down TIE fighters. The Falcon is quite hard to control in this first person level. The D-pad is used to steer in each direction, while L and R are used to rotate the ship. The B button accelerates and Y fires. You can press the select button to set the D-pad to rotate and L and R to steer left and right, but the default way seems more natural, to be honest. The trick with this level is to keep your movements brief and do what you can to blow up the TIE fighters before they become a nuisance. Once the core has been destroyed, the whole Death Star catches fire, prompting an escape sequence. You'll need to keep the B button held down to accelerate at all times, otherwise the explosion will catch up with you, causing you damage and eventually killing you dead. There aren't any TIE fighters to worry about here, and you just need to keep her steady and make sure you don't crash into anything. This is easier said than done, as the first person view really doesn't give you a good sense of what's in your flight path and what isn't, and that's a problem when you have to actively rotate the ship as the tunnels change and strafe left and right to avoid some of the walls. Escape the Death Star explosion, and the game, and the entire original trilogy, is over. Your reward for saving the galaxy, as it rightly should be in a pre-Special Edition era, is some beautiful cutscenes and a Super Nintendo rendition of that classic Star Wars jam, Yub Nub. Savour those notes, let them sink in before the credits start rolling. And that, my friends, is the completion of the original trilogy as told by the Super Star Wars series. Didn't we all have fun? Actually, I did. While Return of the Jedi does little to surprise the player, it does do a fantastic job of polishing up the gameplay of the first 2 entries. It's a fairer game than Empire, a lengthier but better rounded game overall than Super Star Wars, and it's arguably the best game of the Super Star Wars trilogy. I had fun playing these 3 Super Nintendo games, I really did. Each one has done an excellent job of bringing Star Wars to home consoles, and as I play these games in 2021, I realise how much I miss a good movie license, or even a passable one. The games industry has lost the idea of taking a movie and distilling it into an interactive adaptation, adding a little flourish here and there. It's something I do think is missing when it's done in such fashion like this. Like a Jedi's lightsaber, it's a relic of a bygone era. You think I would be closing the book on the Super Star Wars trilogy now, but you could not be further from the truth. Like I've done with the previous 2 games, this week we'll also see some extra videos of my entire playthrough of Super Return of the Jedi, a video detailing every cheat in the game, and much more. But we still have a week of Super Star Wars months to go, and if you thought this series was confined to the Super Nintendo, you were wrong, as the series made its way to smaller consoles and almost made it to the Sega Mega Drive too. Come back for the final week of Puckwith Gaming's Super Star Wars month next week.